I call the Environment and Natural Resources Finance and Policy Committee to order. Members, we have a quorum. And the minutes, I'm going to go through, we have two motions. So has Representative Falconer, have you had a chance to review the minutes?
Thank you,
from
Chair.
February 13th?
Thank you, Chair. I have, and I move for them to be adopted.
Thank you, Representative Falconer. The motion is to approve the minutes from February 13th, 2025. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion prevails. Representative Falconer, did you have a chance to look at the minutes from February 18th?
I also did, and I move for them to be adopted as well.
Representative Falconer moves to approve the minutes from February 18th, 2025. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes from February 18th are approved. So today we have a couple of bills that we're going to go through and then overview from MPCA. The first of the two bills that are up is going to be Representative Franson, but I do think that there may be treats. Magically, they appear.
Yes, Mr. Chair, they come from the city of Alexandria, the city that is easy to get to, hard to leave. And you may be wondering why Minnesota is purple. Well, because the lady that runs the Sugar Shack in Alexandria did them purple to represent a united front, since we're all supposed to get along these next 2 years, so.
That's very nice, Representative. Just want to quickly note for members regarding the two bills, these bills are conversation starters. It was, I think, birthed from a number of requests over the years to talk about license fees for those buying a fishing license. Both of these bills will be laid over today. We're hoping just to kind of see what the appetite is for potentially moving something like this forward, or what suggestions members might have, or the public, others. And if there's something there, then there may be a broader conversation at a later time. But I'm going to go ahead and welcome Representative Franson to the committee. Since you're not a member of the committee, I will move your bill. I move that House File 413 be laid over for possible inclusion in a future bill. Representative Franson, please introduce yourself for the record and tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, House File 413 is a bill that would allow a resident, do I have to state my name, did you say?
For the record, you may.
Representative Mary Franson. This bill would allow a resident age 65 or older to fish without a license. Under current law, a resident age 90 or older may fish without a license. Now, members, I've heard this time and time and time again throughout my years here of those 65 and older that would like this opportunity to not have to pay for a fishing license. Roger in my district, I'm going to read a letter, and I'm going to go real quick because I know we are short on time and you definitely want to hear from the MPCA, not from me. So I'm just going to read his letter. He's really been pushing me on this, okay? Now, Roger is 80 years old. The Zoom was a little too much, so he emailed me his testimony, okay? And if you would like it for your own personal record, we can make sure that happens. He says, "Good morning. Thank you for taking time to review a much-needed change for our senior citizens in the state of Minnesota. My name is Roger, and I reside in Alexandria, Minnesota, Douglas County for the last 80 years. I am not only a senior citizen in Minnesota, but also a retired Army veteran with 20-plus years service. I was checking through the hunting and fishing regulations and found something that disturbed me. When our parents and grandparents became the age of 65, they received a free fishing license from the state of Minnesota. Now, to get a free fishing license, senior citizen or retired veterans are forced to wait until the age of 90, at which time it is very difficult to get around, and if alive, are living in nursing homes or assisted livings, making it next to impossible to be utilized. Something to think about. After checking all the states around Minnesota, here's what I found about their licensing fees. Wisconsin, $7 at 65 years. North Dakota, $5 at 65 years. South Dakota, $12 at 65 years. Iowa, free at 65 years. And in checking in Canada, it is also free at 65 years. With there being 135 lakes in Douglas County, there are free resources out there for everyone to enjoy. Most people, when they retire, they are dependent on others to go fishing because their income does not allow them to maintain their fish house or boat any longer because of the severe reduction in income. For the time, they do not get to go out with others. Right now, as it stands, it detours people from going to get a license because they feel it will not be worth the money to go once or twice a year. Senior citizens still like to get out and go fishing, even if from shore or pier. And it will keep them active in the community and provide them to exercise not only their body, but their mind instead of staying in or having to find something in the communities that generally are costly to attend or participate in. Thank you for your time. If you have any additional questions, I'd be able to happily answer them. You can call me, which if you want his number, I can give that to you at your convenience. And that is signed Roger. So members, I understand this is a conversational piece. I understand the hit that it might take and would take to the Game and Fish Fund. Recognize that, but I do thank you for the opportunity to be able to advocate for the wishes of my constituent.
Thank you, Representative Franson. We're happy to hear your bill today.
Thank you.
I think we were thinking about it earlier. It may be your first time in front of the Environment Committee, so
It
welcome.
absolutely is. What a great day this is. Like, I have just broken ceilings today.
I wanted to quickly check and see, I think DNR's here. If you come to the testifier's desk and introduce yourself for the record.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Pat Rivers. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Fish and Wildlife at the Minnesota DNR.
Thank you. We are glad you're here today. If you had any testimony to offer, I just wanted to give you an
Sure.
opportunity, so thank
Thank you,
you.
Mr. Chair. We appreciate the intent of this bill and another bill, I think we might be heard a little bit, about increasing opportunities for people to get outdoors by removing barriers such as the cost of a fishing license. We do have concerns about how House File 413 would impact the health of the Game and Fish Fund. Anglers age 65 and older are a growing contingent of our license buyers and currently contribute about $4 million annually in annual license revenue. In addition, angling license dollars, Minnesota receives sport fish and restoration dollars. These are excise taxes paid by anglers when they buy fishing equipment. Last year, we received $12.8 million in this excise tax. That apportionment by state is calculated in part based on the number of certified license buyers. And free license buyers are people that just fish, do not add into that part of the equation. By removing anglers age 65 and older from requiring to buy a license, we would lose about $1.1 million in sport fish restoration dollars. An annual reduction of about $5 million per year to the Game and Fish Fund will increase the urgency of a fee increase to ensure the solvency of the Game and Fish Fund. And fewer license buyers means that shift will happen on fewer license buyers. So we appreciate the intent of the bill, and we look forward to working with you on how we can make fishing more accessible to everyone. And I want to remind everyone that the next fishing license season begins on March 1st. So please buy that license and enjoy the late ice fishing.
Thank you, Director. And I'm just going to quickly check and see if there's anyone else in the audience today that wanted to testify on the bill. All right. Thank you, Director. You may want to stand by. I'm assuming that there may be a question or two that you'd like to address along with the bill author. Members, if you would have any questions, now would be the time. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I'm sitting in some of these committees where we see bills coming for more general fund spending. I do want to compliment you, Representative Franson, on the cookie, but also your bill is more conservative than the bill coming forward after you, which I think is eliminating the fee. I think yours is reducing, or is yours eliminating?
Mine's eliminating.
Oh, Okay, so that would mean more spending.
I was going to say, wow,
Representative
that's
Franson.
quite the compliment. I didn't know if he was going to stick with it, though.
Representative Hanson.
Yeah, it appears that then Representative Franson is actually would require more spending, more general fund spending.
I am the bonding chair,
Representative
Hanson, so
And the cookie
Goes
was
hand in
excellent.
hand.
The cookie was excellent, but, I think we've had these bills over the years, and, one of the compromises previous years was the 90, but how do you make sure that the programs continue and provide the service with the fees, I think is a worthwhile discussion.
Any other member questions? Representative Franson will give you the final word, seeing no more questions.
thank you, Chair Heinzman and Representative Hanson, for your comments. I do recognize that is quite a big hit, and as legislators, we are there to advocate for the needs of our constituents, no matter how expensive they may be sometimes, right? So I know he's watching, and I'm sure he is very grateful for the time the committee has given us. And just a little plug, the first day of fishing license, when we can get our new fishing license for 2025, just so happens to also fall on Representative Hanson and I's birthdays. So we may be celebrating a little excessive by getting our fishing license that day. So thank you for your time.
Thank you again, Representative Franson. I would renew my motion that House File 413 be laid over. The bill is laid over. Representative Nash, if you would make your way.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, Committee.
Welcome, Representative Nash. Welcome today to the committee. I would move your bill for you, as you're not a member of the committee. I'd move that House File 276 be laid over for possible inclusion in a future bill. Chair Nash, please introduce yourself for the record and tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am Jim Nash, District 48A. Live on Lake Waconia, which is the second largest lake in the metro area, and we fish a lot. For any of you that would like to, you can come by and look at my iPad. It is, I think, like 900 fishing pictures. I fish all over the state. I fished on every major lake that we have, and I fish during the summer with a group of folks that provide fish for the Waconia Lions Wild Game Dinner, and they are called, self-called, the Old Guys Fishing Club, and I am a guest, so I'm not in that club. But what they tell me is, Jim, we've given at the office and have so for years and years and years. So these are folks who have been pillars of the community for years. There are Lions, they're former business owners, they are people who give generously. There's one, his name is Ron McDemus, and Ron does take a kid fishing every year on Lake Waconia, where he himself buys fishing gear for kids. Ron just wants to not to be able to spend as much on his fishing licenses, Mr. Chair. So my bill, 276, would simply reduce it by a meager $10. And it's really not asking that much. And I thank Chair Hanson, or former Chair Hanson, or Lead Hanson, for speaking so kindly of my bill as being the more conservative and better alternative to the previous bill. I think what we have here, members, is a recognition that we as legislators get to change how fees are collected on things like this. And it's important, particularly for someone like myself and my friends as the Old Guys Fishing Club. They are great donors to the community, and I think would just love a small recognition that once you reach 65, that it's okay to collect a little bit less money from you than you do from people like myself or Chair Heinzman or Chair Hanson. So that's the gist of the bill. It does have a fiscal component to it, but I think, once again, it is a reasonable request for us to look at how do we collect money through licenses, and I buy mine. I buy, I think, pretty much every license you can buy, Mr. Chair. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Representative Nash. And kind of the same drill as before, members, if Deputy Director Rivers would like to share a few thoughts, I will start there. please introduce yourself for the record.
Mr. Chair, members, Pat Rivers, Deputy Director, Fish and Wildlife Division. Unlike the previous bill, House File 276 does not impact the sport fish restoration dollars that would come to Minnesota. So that's a good improvement in my opinion. And secondly, the reimbursement from the general fund recognizes that angling is big business in Minnesota, whether it's filling your boat up with gas, staying at a resort, picking up bobbers and bait, you name it, it contributes to greater Minnesota and all of Minnesota's economy. So we appreciate that recognition. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director. And again, if there's anybody here that would also like to testify, just providing that opportunity before we go to member questions. All right, seeing none. Members, are there any questions? Representative Gilman? Representative Gilman, you grabbed for your mic, so.
Perhaps, Mr. Chair, Representative Gilman was going to ask me which lakes I fish in her district, and they will remain a mystery.
Lead Fisher, if you would like to.
Thank you, Chair Heitzman. Thank you, Representative Nash, for bringing the bill forward. It's great to have this conversation starting. I think it's something that we want to make sure that we're making it easier for our elderly population to be able to stay engaged in the sports going forward. And I appreciate the fact that we're looking at ways of how to offset the revenue, because we want to make sure the fund stays sustainable for the future, and it's had downward pressure. So I appreciate the creative way. Doesn't mean this is where it's going to end up, but I appreciate the discussion going and the creative ideas out there. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Lead Fisher. Any other questions, members? Absent questions, I did want to mention that there are a number of letters of support in your packet for House File 276. There's one from the Congressional Sportsman Foundation and Conservation Minnesota. You may be interested in taking a look at their thoughts on the bill. I thought that there certainly seems to be a good opportunity to, as we all seem to agree, start this conversation, and that's part of the reason we're hearing the bills today on this subject. Chair Nash, if you have any additional thoughts, we'll come back to you before I renew the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just say again, we all know people who are avid anglers, and I would just say that a recognition of 65 being perhaps a better age than 90 is maybe a really good approach. Once again, those 65-year-olds will probably having grandkids that they may be introducing to angling for the very first time. And it's just a great recognition of the time that they have spent buying full price licenses. And, you know, as somebody who has taught all of my kids to fish, it's something that I think that we want to really work on to make sure that we're creating that next generation of anglers, because beyond just being able to take advantage of the lakes here in the state of Minnesota, it is a huge business to our state. And if you've never been up to perhaps Leech Lake, Winnebagosh, Lake of the Woods, when you go on opening day, it is an amazing display of the economic engine that fishing is to our state. And I think that it's just a simple request that this bill is making to provide a little bit of relief for people who are at age 65. So with that, Mr. Chair, I do appreciate the time getting me into committee, and I look forward to working with any and all who may have questions, or as we try to figure out how does this airplane land. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Nash. And that being the end of the discussion, I will renew my motion that House File 276 be laid over. The bill is laid over. Moving on, members, to the MPCA presentation that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting. If MPCA, I see Assistant Commissioner is here. Excuse me. Mr. Johnson, if you would like to open your presentation, I am sorry for mistitling you, so if you would go ahead and get that perfect for the record, that would be great. Members, it might take a second or two, but looks like we're there.
All right, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Tom Johnson, Government Relations Director for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Appreciate Mr. Chair, you giving the agency a whole hour and change here. We know I can be a little long-winded, so appreciate that. So anyway, thanks for inviting us, and we're looking forward to working with the committee as we move forward.
Mr. Johnson, I would just mention that in case your presentation does not need to use the full allotment of time, I think members would be okay getting out a minute or two early.
Absolutely.
But do be prepared. I'm sure there's going to be a number of questions. So go
Certainly,
ahead and
certainly.
proceed.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just to start off here, we've got a number of the members in the commissioner's office that you might see here at the Capitol. Of course, Commissioner Kessler, appointed in November of 2021. And then we have Deputy Commissioner Tester. The three assistant commissioners, which you'll see is kind of a theme. We have air, water, land, and climate. And so Kirk Adelka is assistant commissioner for land. Dana Vanderbosch is assistant commissioner for water and agriculture. And then Frank Kolash is the assistant commissioner for air and climate. Myself as government relations director, and then we also have Rachel Ganani, who serves as chief of staff. Our mission at the agency is simple in concept, to protect and improve the environment and human health. But as you'll hear a little bit about, that does get pretty complex as we do our work in water, air, land, climate, which is our areas of responsibility at the agency. Generally, this follows both the state laws that we have, but also the federal laws that the agency implements, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and then also some climate laws, federal climate laws as well. And so I'll get into that later on. But moving into water, of course, water is a key part of Minnesota culture and our way of life. Protecting our waters in Minnesota begins with consistent monitoring for pollutants. We have a robust monitoring network, as well as a work with local partners on receiving their data, watershed districts, soil and water conservation districts. That data provides the foundation with which we then create water quality standards. A common misconception is that the standards themselves are part of the permit, but the water quality standards are actually standards for the water bodies themselves. And then based on those standards that we create for fishable, swimmable, drinkable, as is in the Clean Water Act, then we do the work of the watershed approach that I know you heard from Bowser on earlier this week. And we also then issue the permits. The water quality limits are in the permits are meant to then ensure that the water body is meeting its water quality standards. So that also brings us over to air, which similarly, the foundational approach here is monitoring. We have a robust network of more than 50 locations that constantly measure pollutants in the outdoor air, ambient air quality monitoring. And of course, when air quality poses a risk to Minnesotans' health, we issue air quality alerts. And so you will see those from time to time, most recently from wildfires coming from wildfires in Canada and on the West Coast. Based also on that monitoring data, then we work to regulate facilities as directed by the Clean Air Act, and then review and issue air permits. One note about air, I know this committee has spent a lot of time looking at air, and so you all likely already know how complex that area is, but when we look at the code of federal laws that cover environmental law, just for an idea, if you're looking at the code, the water section is about this big, the land section is about this big, the air section is gigantic. So it's a really complex area of both federal and state law. Our land programs, these obviously healthy land and soil is essential for thriving Minnesota communities and drives economic development and opportunity, improves our health, and contributes to safe drinking water and recreation. The MPCA studies, monitors, and regulates many pollutants that can pose threats to human health and the environment. We identify, investigate, and determine appropriate cleanup plans for sites where hazardous substances have already been or could be released. And then the other piece of the land program is that planning and permitting on the waste side, so hazardous waste and solid waste. And the goal of those programs is to prevent contamination of land, water, and air by facilities that handle or store those materials. Finally, climate. The committee may be familiar with the state's climate action framework. This is a plan that sets a vision for how our state will address and prepare for climate change. I'll note for the committee, we are working on an update currently, and that includes the voices of Minnesotans. This plan identifies immediate near-term actions that we must take to achieve our long-term goals. Those goals first set out in the Next Generation Energy Act of 2007 required our state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% between 2005 and 2050. In 2023, those goals were updated to now reduce greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030 from that 2005 baseline and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And finally, the greenhouse gas emissions report, just calling attention to that for the committee. The Department of Commerce and the MPCA issue that report each biennium to track the emission reductions received, as well as what is necessary to eventually achieve the full 80% reduction by 2050. So, Mr. Chair, some of the state laws that cover the agency are 114C and D. 115 is the Core Water Pollution Control Act of the state. We also have in 115A most of our solid waste laws. In 115B through 115D, that's most of our remediation and cleanup laws. And then as we get into 116, that is really the core enabling statutes of the agency, as well as several of the air regulations. I'll note that the agency also has responsibilities in other areas like 325 E and F, which are some consumer protection laws, and in 216B, 216H, which are some of the climate laws. The agency also, a key part of our work is actually delegated to us by the federal government. And so I mentioned earlier the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And RCRA for short, that is really the solid waste law and hazardous waste law. So describes the waste management program mandated by Congress. And then those responsibilities are passed down to the state, and we have formal agreements with EPA to implement that work. It's really our partnerships, most importantly with the people of Minnesota, that drive this work forward. We also work with all levels of government, federal, as I mentioned, state, county, and municipal. Public involvement and outreach is a really important part of our work. Also want to call out the volunteer water monitors. This is an excellent network of over 1,000 citizens who voluntarily monitor water quality around the state. The MPCA has 6 regional offices. 70% of the MPCA staff is in the St. Paul office. 30% of the staff are located across those regional offices in Detroit Lakes, Brainerd, Marshall, Mankato, Duluth, and Rochester. A little bit more about the agency at a high level. Established in 1967. Notably, this was before the EPA was created, so I think a a recognition of one of the, Minnesota was one of the few states to have an environmental agency at the time. So kind of a recognition of the importance that Minnesota puts on its environment. We're a medium-sized agency, about 1,000 full-time employees. And last I checked, I think it's majority scientists that work at the agency. So engineers, hydrologists, soil scientists, chemists, biologists, environmental specialists. This is a overview of some of our funding sources at the agency. Notably, Clean Water Fund is not shown here. It's not considered part of our base budget, just due to the way that that fund is appropriated, but it is an important funding source for the MPCA's work, about $25 million per year currently. Otherwise, you'll see the federal funds are a decent chunk, but currently that also contains big portions of federal one-time grants. We're looking at the environmental fund really is the major source of funding that the agency receives for ongoing staff work. And then another picture here of sort of where the money goes into our divisions. And so you'll see remediation is a major piece of the puzzle here. That currently does include, as I mentioned before, or as you might have seen on the other slide, remediation is broken into 3M, the 3M account, which is part of that settlement funding, and then the remediation account for other purposes. And that is combined here, so you'll see 301 million, but part of a big chunk of that is 3M dollars. I want to touch on a little bit of the grants that we've been able to issue over the past 2 bienniums, over 400 million in grants we've sent out throughout the state. Local governments are the major recipient of those grants, but you'll see certainly our small business loan program is a very popular part of this, as well as environmental assistance grants that can go to businesses, other state agencies, nonprofits, or other recipients. But this work does cover the entire state. We're very proud to have grants going out in every county in the state. Some really brief examples of recent grants. Representative Burkle upgrading the refrigerator equipment at Earl's Food Market in Thief River Falls. There was the Northeast Minneapolis Tool Library, Representative Jordan received a grant. We had upgrading recycling and composting facilities in Ramsey County, Chair Fisher and Lead Fisher, and also in Hutchinson, Representative Gilman. We also in St. Louis County, Representative Warwas. So lots of different areas that the MPCA touches that are outside of that core air, water, land permitting work that I think were thought of most generally. Really quick, this is just a picture of our organizational structure, and then I'll touch on each of the divisions really quickly. For the committee, the Resource Management and Assistance Division has both regulatory and non-regulatory approaches. So the regulatory piece is the solid waste, hazardous waste, and above-ground storage tanks work. On the other pieces are what I was speaking about the Small Business Assistance Grant Program is through Resource Management Assistance Division, or RMAD, as well as our Environmental Education Program and some key pollution prevention work. Oh, I skipped the Remediation Division, Mr. Chair. So just to note, that piece is, of course, cleaning up contaminated properties. This is a very expensive process. So when we talk a little bit about prevention, managing, and cleaning up pollution is really the most expensive type of work that we do. And so we really focus as much effort as we can on prevention. These projects can be, remediation projects can be years long and are very expensive. Our watershed division, again, both regulatory and non-regulatory approaches here. We have our investigative work and monitoring work that happens within the watershed division. They also house our feedlot program so that that regulatory piece is there. And then there's several grant programs that work with Bowser and local partners to implement the watershed approach. Environmental Analysis and Outcomes Division, or EAO. This is a lot of where our monitoring happens for air quality monitoring and water quality monitoring. There's also the development of water quality standards and other environmental standards occurs under EAO's work. And all the data that we receive does take a lot of staff time to contextualize, to manage, and make that available for the public in a transparent fashion. The industrial division, this is what a lot of folks see. There's a lot of controversial projects or projects of great interest that come through the industrial vision because it is that core permitting work with larger private industrial facilities. This encompasses the air quality program, water quality, hazardous waste, underground storage tanks, all of that type of work. The other piece of the water program is the municipal division. So certainly cities, as many of you will already know, have their wastewater treatment plants, and all that core permitting work comes through the municipal division, as well as proper management of stormwater and septic systems. And finally, our operations division, as you might expect, includes all of our fiscal contracting, human resources, legal teams, communications, data management, facilities and fleet, and our emergency response teams. Touching on some of the federal funds, particularly, Mr. Chair, just want to call out the really excellent opportunity that the state had under the climate pollution reduction grants through the Inflation Reduction Act. This was $200 million awarded to the state, and not just the MPCA, but across the state agencies. So Department of Ag, for example, is getting $26 million for the upgrading of equipment for farmers, also for the ag water quality certification program, as well as some cover crop incentives. There's also money going to the DNR and Bowser on some peatland restoration. There's money for upgrading refrigerants, like we talked about, major improvements in our food waste systems. So really looking at a comprehensive investment in our food systems across the board. There's a few other examples of federal grants that we have here, but the other one that I'll call out is the electric school bus program, which has both been a federal and state match, and that has gotten, I believe, over 200 buses out across the state that have been electrified. The commissioner's priorities, I just want to touch on these for the agency. As you know, PFAS continue to be a major concern for the state. We have Minnesota's PFAS blueprint, and we've made a lot of progress across that, and want to acknowledge the work of the legislature on Amar's law, but also the planning and design grants that came out of the 2023 session, and staffing that has been critical to implementing that work. The commissioner continues to be very concerned about how Minnesota will react to a changing climate, and so both the climate action framework as well as the work of the climate subcabinet, which the commissioner is a lead of. And I want to really recognize the climate resiliency grants, $100 million that have gone out across the state. This has really been transformational for communities in greater Minnesota and in the metro area for planning and implementation of resilience plans. And then good governance and service to all Minnesotans. We've talked about this a little bit the other day, Mr. Chair. We're committed to more accountability for the state, more efficiency for the agency to continue to issue permits quickly, and then also ensuring that we're as transparent as possible for our citizens. A couple of examples here. The permit status dashboard is one thing that, again, want to call attention to. And then the cumulative impacts rulemaking offers an opportunity, key opportunity for citizens to engage in the permitting process in the future. I'll just leave you with the committee with a success story, Mr. Chair. The St. Louis Area River of Concern, an example of a project of legacy contamination of decades, where in collaboration with local governments, with with tribes, with the state, multiple state agencies, federal government, we were able to, over time, clean up that area, and now it is a thriving habitat. So thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director. Members, questions? Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The agency, like many state agencies, received a lot of additional dollars in the last 2 years. What has that resulted in terms of additional staff at the MPCA? Where do those numbers stack up? And do you have unfilled positions at this point in time? Can you give us a little bit of a lens to that?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that in the letter that we sent to the committee, to you, Mr. Chair, there's more details, but from what I recall, we have about 60 folks have been hired over the last several years, and and most of those positions have been filled. There may be some that we're still working to fill or are vacant only because of a retirement or a backfill that's happened, but the grand majority of those have been filled.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Johnson. When I hear that, I obviously that was a stated goal, and I even remember the commissioner sitting here 2 years ago and saying that it was staffing needs that was the holdup for us to see a faster, more efficient permitting system. And at the time, that was the struggle. I remember the words from her lips just thinking about it. So considering what we've discussed in this committee to this point, and what you've heard, I know you've heard whether it's from the chamber or the other folks who have talked about how Minnesota kind of stands as an island compared to neighboring states and similar states over how long it takes us to move through our permitting process. Can you kind of share what is it about our process today that takes us so much longer than our neighboring states comparatively, realizing that a lot of times it's more than double our area and neighboring states specifically? Thank you.
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Schultz. I think that's an important question. There's a couple pieces to it. I think staffing has been a big part of it, and we are, I believe, moving quicker on projects than we have in the past several years because of the increases that have happened, not only directly investing in permit engineers, but also in teams like our community affairs team, which have helped to manage the public part of the process, which does take a lot of time. And so between public noticing, pre-public noticing, any comments that are received and need to be responded to by law before then moving on to the next part of the project, managing that public process is a really key part. So that's one piece I think has really improved over the past couple years because of the investments made. I think Beyond that, what is still taking Minnesota a lot of time is, frankly, we do a lot of technical assistance with permittees. We spend a lot of time talking with Wisconsin because, there are a number of states in, for example, the chamber permitting report that we can compare ourselves to. I think we'd argue that, for example, Colorado, while it may have a similar size economy and maybe similar types of projects that it's trying to attract, the environment is completely different, and same with the regulatory landscape. So we look at Wisconsin as a very clear example of a very water-rich environment, similar type of landscape. Anyway, Wisconsin issues permits a lot quicker because they deny applications a lot quicker. Something that we've heard is that if they receive an incomplete application, they send it back to be completed. And basically just say, we're going to wait for you to finish all the details of your application, then you can resubmit, and we'll continue to work on it. I think in Minnesota, we take the approach a lot of the time of you submit your plan, it's mostly there. Yes, we'll determine it's incomplete, and you might need to administratively complete, and you might need to fill out a few forms, but we'll work with you on the emissions calculations. We'll work with you on the design of the facility, even in many cases. So we provide a lot of technical assistance as part of our permitting process, and if we want to keep that, which I think we do, we see it as value to the agency, and we think permittees see that as a value. If we want to keep that approach, then staff has been the answer.
Representative Schultz. Representative Gilman.
Thank you so much, Chair Heinzman, and thank you so much for being here today. So I'd like to just touch base really quick on this. The MPCA received some significant one-time appropriations in the last biennium. One of those was about $100 million for your climate resiliency grants. Just curious if you could just talk a little bit more about that, where that's sitting, where things are at with that. That'd be great. Thank you.
Director Johnson.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Gilman. Yes, so all of the money, all of that $100 million is either already awarded or is out for RFP. So the entirety of that is in the process or has already been granted out to communities. There's, I forget if it's 4 or 6 rounds overall, but we have, we had a first initial round of two additional initial rounds of planning dollars that went out, both one round just to small cities to make sure that they had an opportunity to get in before the big cities. And then we had an overall opportunity for every city to apply for planning dollars. I think in total that was $1.5 to $2 million. Then we opened the first big round of implementation dollars, and those were a round of $20 million. Again, if I recall correctly, happy to send additional information, but I think it was $20 million and then a big round of $35 million. So those 2 rounds were for stormwater resilience and then wastewater resilience. So those are all awarded, to my knowledge, and are either public or close to public where those have gone out. And we're basically doing the same thing a second time. So we had done another round of planning grants, and then we have another large $35 million open RFP currently, which I think is open until the 27th, if any of your communities would like to apply still.
Great. So I'll just do a quick little follow-up, if you don't mind, Chair.
Representative Gilman, go ahead.
Thank you for that. So if we could see just small cities versus the larger cities, greater Minnesota, how many were able to utilize those grants and get that? And then, because again, some of our smaller cities have had, they have challenges, accessing just how to navigate the navigator system, like how to get on, how to, hire a grant writer to do those things. We just want to make sure that we're prioritizing, not only all of our districts, all of, the areas that are touched. And I'd love to see, infrastructure, how much infrastructure was impacted by that. So is that in your report, or is that in a report, or is it somewhere on your website we can find it?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Gilman, yes, I think we have a webpage dedicated to this grant opportunity, and there should be some information on there of what the exact types of work that has been done and is expected to be done under that program. I will say I know at least 75% of the initial planning grants went out to Greater Minnesota. And as far as the implementation dollars, I don't have that information at my fingertips, but happy to follow up.
Thank you.
Representative Hanson, I think you might have had something on this, so I just wanted to give you a chance to speak to that if you did.
I'm just processing that 75% of the grants went out to Greater Minnesota.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I share Representative Gilman's in that report as well and seeing where the dollars were spent. I mean, this is a lot of federal money, which is good to see that investment in our state, but it's good to see where exactly we're investing it. So I'm excited to see that there's interest in tracking those dollars. I have some questions about Smith Foundry and the OLA report that was just released. There were some concerns that the OLA identified with the MPCA's process for both working with the EPA and communicating with community. And I know that in that report, the MPCA said that they had been working on improving some of those tracking. Can you tell me more about that, what you're doing differently, how you're communicating with different community members, and how you're working with the EPA? And then I have some more questions about the EPA.
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Jordan. So, yes, this is an important piece of what we feel, and the OLA, we feel did a good job covering the facts of the situation. The conversation with EPA, it was not that we had major disagreements in the approach. It was that we used different approaches, and we weren't privy to the information that the EPA had requested, additional information that the EPA had requested from the facility. Once we got that information, then we were able to duplicate the EPA's results and their approach, and that's where I think this has, number one, resolved. It's a pretty obscure rule that's not used very often, and so it was a very specific situation that we believe we've resolved between the EPA and MPCA, that approach. For the complaint tracking, we are working on a complaint tracker system. We've been working with Minute on improving that. That's a 20-year-old system, Mr. Chair, and I think it does need some improvement. And so that's one of the pieces. We also have been working more closely with the city of Minneapolis and our internal policies. So when we do get complaints that we cannot address, for example, odor has been one of those pieces that until those rules are finished, hopefully, in the next couple years, the municipalities are the lead on odor issues. And so that back and forth between ourselves and the city has really been the issue with complaints in the past.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Representative Jordan, do you have follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So where are we at with the odor rulemaking then? There was money appropriated for doing that odor rulemaking. When can we see an odor rule?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we began working on first understanding how other states have done this. That was the first couple years, or the first year here of really implementing it after we got the funds and started the process. We really began talking with other states, doing a full review of federal approaches, state approaches, and even other countries. And we now have that information and are about to start the process in earnest. So The work has begun as of January 2025 on the rule, and we're looking at an early fiscal year 2027 intent to adopt.
Representative Jordan, was that I want to ask a follow-up, or was that I'm done?
No, I have some follow-up questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Representative Jordan.
They're on something different, but I think January of 2025 was last month. But I have questions about the EPA and the relationship between the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the federal EPA. Can you describe that relationship and how you work with the EPA? We talked a little bit about how the MPCA has to catch up to some of the reporting that EPA does to make sure communities have, like, you know, safe drinking water and air to breathe. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship and how, if there are any funding implications that come from the federal government or staff expertise that impact the work of the MPCA?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Jordan, yes. So the EPA is, again, for many of our core authorities for our air and water and land programs is our boss essentially in that work. So they hold the authority from Congress, and they have delegated that authority to the MPCA. So we, in many cases, report to the EPA, and when we issue permits that are federal permits, either a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System or NPD or NPDES permit on the water side, or a federal Part 70 Title V permit on the Clean Air Act side, EPA has the ability to review and comment on that permit, and ultimately could reject that permit. But usually we get comments from EPA and then address those comments as we do the public's comments as part of our process. So that's one piece. I think EPA and MPCA are a co-regulator in most cases. So EPA reserves the right to come into Minnesota and enforce on any one of those state laws or rules that allow us to implement their federal programs. So, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a federal permit in that case. It could be that the EPA decides to enforce upon a state permit that is issued under the state's air quality rules, in this case, in the case of Smith Foundry. So we are a co-regulator. They may ask for information on a proactive basis. It's often that EPA will decide on a type of facility that they want to get more information about. For example, several years ago, it was metal shredders for whatever reason. Recently, it's been foundries. They may pick other types of facilities in the future and decide that those are the facilities they want to, because they haven't looked at them in a while, look at those types of facilities, and then may come in to inspect those types of facilities because of the priority that they've set as an administration.
Representative Finke. It looked like you had asked to be on the list. I apologize, Representative Finke. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And following up on Representative Jordan's question, so we've seen language about the EPA closing, just like, the Department of Education getting rid of the EPA as a goal for the new administration. So what happens if there is no federal EPA? What are the protections that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has? How much of our stuff is tied to the feds? And if the Fed authority goes away, we have no authority.
Yeah.
Director Johnson.
Mr. Chair, that's an excellent question. Representative Hanson and Representative Jordan, I realize I didn't answer that part of your question, but the state laws that we have set and rules that we have set in place, for the most part, are the condition upon which EPA has recognized our ability to implement the federal laws. So we do have several state laws and rules in place that are considered adequate by EPA to implement those federal laws. So I think for the most part, we would have those structures in place, but there could be, number one, key federal funding pieces. To Representative Jordan, your point, we get formula dollars from the federal government to implement those key federal laws that could be at major risk if the EPA were to go away. Or there could be a federal backstop, I suppose, as well, that, could be at risk as well.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And kind of the same question, and it goes back to even the state climate resiliency grants, is what's the difference between awarded, encumbered, and expended? And I think that might be what and that may be more than you can digest right here, but on the federal government of what's been awarded, encumbered, and expended, and then on the state dollars, what's been, you've obviously had the appropriations, what's been encumbered or by the various fiscal entities, and then what's been expended.
Representative Hanson, that was a question that our side of the table was also contemplating. We're trying to drive at that a little bit earlier. So Director Johnson, if you don't have that very, very specifically available for us today, that's maybe a conversation we can have offline or an email to update the members of the committee, but go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to provide that to the committee. I'll just say the awarded and out the door funds are the expended. Encumbered might be they've been awarded the funds, but we haven't signed a contract yet. And then there are other where we may have an RFP out, and that might not technically be encumbered, but folks are actively applying for those funds. But we'll get more specifics to you, Mr. Chair, and the committee.
Doctor, I think that would be helpful. I would appreciate that. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the indulgence on this. I'm going to go back to the permitting issue because, I think we've heard both of the debate and then the continuing questions today about the timing and permitting. I think what Representative Jordan was getting at is, we passed the odor law in May of '23, and the rulemaking didn't start until January of '25 and will not be done until 2027. So and we provided money for that, right? We've got money for that. And odor is often an indicator of air quality problems. And so with Smith Foundry, when you read the report on Smith Foundry, and I'd encourage everybody to read that OLA report, odor complaints coming in from the community, but those have questions. In my district, there was public meeting about a permit request, a permit to increase the amount of particulate that's put in the air that goes right over the Mississippi River. And odor is often an indicator of what's happening at that facility. So at the local meeting, the questions were often about the odor because that's how regular people are worried that there's something in the air that they can't see. They can smell it, but they can't see it. So I think we have a different side of the coin from where you're at on permitting. We're asking, when we have rulemaking, how come that doesn't happen faster? How come when the legislature has acted, you're concerned when the permitting legislature is acted, we're concerned on the rulemaking when the legislature is acted. How come things don't work as fast as we may want them to? So I think those are big questions. And then whether there are state dollars or federal dollars that are there that we provide the money to do it, then should those tasks be done? How do we get those tasks done? And ultimately, we hear from our constituents whether it's Water Gremlin or Smith Foundry or other things, you know? What's happening, you know, how can I complain, who, you know, how does this work? And so, I think that's a big question of how does this work? How do we get that done? Because 2 years going by is a long time. And something's not working. And I don't think, I mean, I think we have good people working in these agencies. I think we have people who are trying very hard, but have we just processed everything so much that we can't get the task done? I don't know. But we need to have results.
Representative Hanson, it sounds like you might need to be working on a rulemaking reform bill. Director Johnson, if you want to respond to that, you can. Otherwise, I'll be going to lead Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, and I understand the frustration about the odor rulemaking in particular. I would say we have 3 major air quality rulemakings in front of us that all take the same experts. They're all the same people, essentially, the air quality scientists, the engineers, and they're all working on the same air toxics regulations, cumulative impacts, odor. And so May 2026 was a hard stop for the cumulative impacts and air toxics rulemakings. And frankly, we will struggle to make that. We will probably make it, but it is a lift. Those are very complicated. And the odor rulemaking did not have the exact same time frame. We want to keep it moving, and we are trying to keep it moving, but we started with a literature review in order to start to get our arms around the subject, because it is something not that many states have tackled. So we wanted to be sure we had an idea of the scope of that rulemaking before we went down that road. And we did have other pieces like a request for information, request for comment for the public over the past couple of years as well. So, but that is the main constraint, is that we have the same professionals. And there's not necessarily a need in that case to hire a bunch more people permanently, but these have stacked on the same people, these 3 rulemakings.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again, for your indulgence. You know, I've thought about, since 2008, we've spent a lot of money on water quality, and that's valuable money that's being spent. But as we move towards legacy potential renewal, or even the renewal that's just occurred with the LCCMR, we didn't, and there's not that many of us that were here back in 2008, but maybe we need to be looking at an equivalent effort of air quality because of the interaction with ecology of air and water being connected. You know, that some of the issues on where things are showing up in water may be because of air deposition. The bird flu might be moving because of manure flying through the air and small particles carrying the virus. So I want to put that out there, that we need to look at air quality. We've spent a lot of money on monitoring water, but we have not spent that equivalent. We did start in the last 2 years with air monitoring devices. I think we probably need more because we can't see that. You know, we can't, and the impacts on children particularly, but also seniors in terms of poor air quality. The data is pretty strong on the health impacts relatively quickly on poor air quality. So that would involve health, that would involve looking at more research on impacts, but also more monitoring. So, Mr. Chair, I just putting something out there on the bigger issue. We've focused on water, and we have to focus on water, but we don't focus an equivalent on air.
So, Representative Hanson, I'm glad we're talking about air quality. I think it's a good discussion that we're having, and we'd probably be remiss if we didn't, in addition to a number of other threats to air quality continue to at least acknowledge that one of the most significant impacts in communities like mine has been wildfires and the smoke from Canada. It's a different track in terms of how we would address it, but it certainly has had a very dramatic impact on folks who suffer from the conditions that you just mentioned, and just a reduction in the quality of life when you're looking outdoors and you're not even sure on a sunny day if you should be outside. I'm not asking you, Director Johnson, to comment on that, but it's just another piece of the air quality puzzle and another reason to root for America at tonight's game. So, Director Johnson.
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair. I think we're open to continuing to look at resources for air quality monitoring and other.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Lead Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. Director Johnson, I've got questions around the federal authority when you're talking about how the feds are involved. One of the things I was wondering as I was hearing the discussion going on between you and Representative Jordan is what is the fed's role when it comes to permitting, and what's the impact on permitting? Because I've got to imagine they're involved somewhere in the process, but how does that impact what is going on now?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, so usually there's a process that includes a pre-public notice for the EPA. And so in many cases, for those delegated programs, as I said, that is EPA is the key authority in those processes. So if we are issuing a permit and EPA directs us to make changes, we have to make those changes. So that can be a delay in the process, certainly, for any of our air or water or land permits.
Lead Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. So as that can have an impact on it is knowing that there is a federal shrinking of the workforce out there, does that mean that potential is going to take longer to get these responses back from the federal government?
Director Johnson.
Mr. Chair and Lead Fisher, I think that is a threat. And I was going to also mention the Army Corps of Engineers. There's a 401 permit or 404, federal 404 permit, and the agency does a 401 certification of that 404 wetlands permit. And so certainly if the Army Corps of Engineers, for example, shrinks in size, that would create a huge bottleneck for those larger soil and water displacement permits that we then certify to meet our water quality standards. We have seen some delay in response from EPA, but that is common under a new administration. So it's not clear whether that's going to continue under potential upcoming cuts, or if that is just a new administration taking control and getting used to governing.
Lead Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. Which types of permits would those have an impact on more? Would it be on the air ones? Would it be on the water ones? Would it be on the 401s, 404s? Where would you think that we might be seeing more impact? And how does that relate to the performance standards that we've had over the last couple of years where 98% have been getting approved right away? How does that impact?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Lead Fisher. I think you bring up an important point. The most complicated permits that maybe are that 2% of permits that aren't meeting the goal are often federal program permits. So the Title V, those big federal air permits, and then also individual water discharge permits. So I think it is a good point that a slowdown on the federal side could definitely impact individual large federal permits that the agency issues on behalf of the EPA. Same with the 401. If there's a 404 permit, that is primarily the issue in the control of the Army Corps of Engineers and not under our control until the permit is finished at the federal government, and then we have to certify it as a state as being protective of our water. So to the extent that the Army Corps might slow down their work, that is absolutely a concern for any of those types of permits that might be required for a facility in Minnesota.
Thank you, Lead Fisher. What further questions?
Yes, further questions. Thank you, Chair Heinzman. And the other one question I have starts deviating a little bit is you were mentioning there's quite a bit of money that we have coming in from the federal government. How has the reliability been on drawing down those funds, or any concerns about pulling down those funds? And how does that impact then getting work carried out, or other programs that you might be using to assist other partners out there?
Yeah.
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Lead Fisher. We have not been able to reliably access the large $200 million CPRG grant. So that is a major concern. There has been periods where it has been clear that we are not able to access those funds at all. There have been times where the funds have been accessible, but perhaps the amount that we've requested has not necessarily been the amount that we receive in reimbursement. And then there are parts where everything is working as it should be. So we're a little bit confused about the process at the federal government right now and the policy there related to those particular funds. It appears to be particularly Inflation Reduction Act dollars that are experiencing this unreliability. And it has had an impact in that those really large federal dollars are all on a reimbursement basis. So you do the work and then you have to go and get reimbursed. And so it's hard for us to start that work or enter into agreements with our state agencies or other partners or put up funds for potential grants until we know we can reliably get that reimbursed.
Lead Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. And thank you for raising that up, because the concern I have is with reimbursement grants. So you've got programs out there that a lot of smaller communities across the state are accessing, doing the work. And right now, we've got concerns about whether the dollars are going to come in from the feds. And if that doesn't happen, does that mean I'm guessing then we're on the hook for that, correct?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Lead Fisher. Yes, if we were to do the work that we're contracted with under that grant and then are not able to be reimbursed for that work, we would end up holding the bag, so to speak.
Lead Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. Director Johnson, so because this is a questionable area, are we still letting grants go in that, still awarding grants in that, or how are we dealing with that going on? Because I'd hate to see for small communities getting stuck or us getting stuck. So how is that impacting the program right now?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In certain cases, we have continued the work on a smaller scale. I think with the major $200 million award, we are leery to start big chunks of that program. Getting those started because it involves, for example, transferring $25 million over to Department of Agriculture to start sending out, and is that a good idea under this if we can't reliably draw down the funds? So we've been leery to start under that larger program. On some of the smaller pieces, I believe the work continues, and we will address that when it comes.
Director Johnson, I think on the theme of concern relative to my friends on the DFL side of the table worried about what's happening with the administration, there's also concern relative to what we've known for quite some time to be a looming deficit in Minnesota. And we could have quite a long conversation of how that scenario has been building And I think I'm just going to keep my questions, though, narrowed to if MPCA has been tracking what could potentially be a challenging budget year due to that potentially impactful deficit, otherwise known as, I think in recent forecast, as a structural imbalance, and how that may be impacting your efforts at MPCA. In addition to that question, then the secondary part of that would be, what are you doing to potentially mitigate that should we have a negative target in this committee and have to make adjustments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's an important question. I think as the same with DNR, I think relative to the overall size of our budget, the general fund is a pretty small portion. Important to note that I think pieces of that are directly passed through the agency. So, for example, the entirety of the EQB's budget is one piece of the general fund that the MPCA receives. The county feedlot programs, we are in the governor's recommendations, there is an adjustment there to reflect the will of the legislature in previous biennium to make a one-time increase that was then, tracked as an ongoing increase. And so we have proposed an adjustment there to make a reduction for future biennium. There are other areas where we could look at, but again, that is also a direct pass-through in certain instances to Minute or to another agency. And so the actual pieces of the general fund that the agency receives are very, very small. But we have been doing those exercises in case.
Thank you, Director Johnson. And there's been conversations, as we get to the end of February and we do have a more solid idea of what the scenario may be. It is something that I'm glad to hear that you're considering what the impact may or may not be. It may not be as impactful in MPCA's budget, but it certainly could be in a number of other subject areas outside of this committee's jurisdiction. But I did want to just quickly bring that question up for the record. So, members, any further questions today? Representative Gilman.
Thank you so much, Chair Heinzman. I'd just like to just do something really quick and just ask, just this committee, as I keep hearing all these things about our budget, the electric school bus thing, I just wanted to ask you a question about that. I know it's on page 13, the 26th slide. You mentioned that we have 200 electric buses now in the state of Minnesota. Is that correct?
Director Johnson.
Mr. Chair and Representative Gilman, I'm not sure. I didn't actually have that number. It's something from my memory. So I'll follow up with a number for sure.
Okay, that's awesome. I'd love to know that because electric buses are $400,000 a piece. And so that'd put us, over $80 million. And so I know the Department of Commerce also popped some money into that. But I think we need to think about this, and I invite my colleagues to think about our needs, our wants, and our nice to haves as we're doing this next couple years as we work together across the aisle. And I think about where does the electric bus fit into that? Where are things with our budget going to go? And we need to just be thinking in that framework of where are our priorities. I did have someone in my office, and I just want to just put this on the record too, that she said her relative has been working for MPCA for 4 years, and she has been home now the last several years. She has the option to work from home. She works 10 hours a week, and she gets paid for 40 and gets full-time benefits. So my question to MPCA right now is when you start looking at the actual impacts of our needs, our wants, and our must-haves, making sure there's oversight on the employees. And are they coming back into work? How can we ensure that people, all the FTEs that we've invested in, the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that we invest in our state partners, our employees, how is there oversight with that? And I encouraged her to report her relative. But I think it's a broader thing that's happening, because we are paying, on average, $600,000 per empty building around here of state agency buildings that are empty. And so as we look at these budgets, I know it's a big deal, and I really want to preserve all the things that are beautiful and wonderful about Minnesota, but I hope we can start looking at that. And I want to know if you could get back to us on what your goal is, Director Johnson, for the MPCA and getting folks back to work in their buildings. Thanks.
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a couple of things there, Representative Gilman. Appreciate the attention to the school bus program. I think in that case, we had both VW settlement money from a federal settlement, and we're able to use that as a match to unlock federal funds that were also available for electric school buses. So in that particular case, no actual investment from state general fund dollars or anything from our budget, just a kind of a win-win, if you will, from a settlement and unlocking, federal funds through the Inflation Reduction Act. But I take your point that we should be looking at the pieces that were nice to have under a surplus and now maybe aren't going to be able to be funded into the future. But I'm surprised to hear about an employee working 10 hours a week. That sounds like it would definitely be a performance issue, and so I'm expecting that will be addressed if that's truly the case. The MPCA, for any of its office space that has been vacant or open, we have subcontracted that out to other agencies, so there is no free space in the MPCA's building, at least. Deed is there, as well as a couple other agencies that have overflow. And so I believe the whole administration is adjusting to accommodate the new flexibility that exists in some schedules. I will say the overwhelming majority of MPCA employees have some time in an office space, and everybody works out of a specific home office or regional or St. Paul office building. And so there is an assigned office for every single MPCA employee, barring a couple exceptions. And so I'm happy to, I think we provided some of that information to you, Mr. Chair, but happy to follow up as well, Representative Gilman, if there's anything further.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Johnson. When I'm looking here at the commissioner's priorities, one of the things that's discussed is the Minnesota Climate Action Framework, which isn't a surprise. It's long been a priority of the Walz administration. So when looking at that, I'm curious not just about how much money has been spent on that, but looking forward around whether it's further planning, implementation, and then thinking about the budget here in Minnesota for the next 2 years, or you could take it out further to what Chair Heinzman mentioned. What percentage of future spending on that priority surrounding Minnesota's Climate Action Framework is contingent upon federal dollars?
Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question. I don't have the answer in front of me, but happy to follow up. I'll say I'm not exactly sure which pieces of the Climate Action Framework require federal dollars. Certainly, federal dollars will be helpful to meet those goals.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one follow-up then, realizing that you might not have the exact part for the future for these next 2 or 4 years. Do you have an idea of how much money was necessary for the last 2 years from the federal level in order to achieve the goals of the Minnesota Climate Action Framework?
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Schultz, I only know that I believe there was over $1 billion in investment from the state I am not sure what amount was put aside from the federal government into the climate action work related to the climate action framework. I don't think every single appropriation had a specific item that it addressed, but certainly there was a lot of investment in the previous biennium.
Thank you, Director. Lead Fisher, anything further that we might need to add to the conversation?
Thank you, Chair Heinzman. Not to this conversation right now.
Thank you, Director Johnson. And with that, members, we are adjourned. Thank you.